We've seen how Light would fare in a world where gods of death and notebooks that can kill exist. He wanted to make a new world, free of crime, and in that world, he would be the only god. Light's intelligence, creativity, and mental fortitude is what allowed him to get so far. But what if we change some things up? What if instead of Light encountering the Death Note, before he encounters some sort of object, he just randomly gets isekai'd and ends up in the world of Re:Zero? Would he be able to survive and endure the traumatic effect of return by death? Before we get into this scenario, we need to lay out the terms and conditions, but before that, goal is 40k, so if you enjoy, subscribe. This video was requested to me on Cash App, so if you want your video to be made, feel free to do so. The terms and conditions will be, Light will not have the Death Note in the scenario. He will only replace Subaru and gain the ability of Return by Death. For those unfamiliar with Re:Zero, Return by Death is an ability given to Subaru as soon as he's transported into the new world. No matter how or when he dies, he will always return to an unspecified, unpredictable, and uncontrollable save point before his initial death. This version of Light will be a pre-timeskip Light, not post-timeskip Light who's more experienced with the Death Note. Pre-timeskip Light and Subaru are the same age, both are around 17. The conditions here is Light's goal is simply to survive Re:Zero. There are multiple threats that Subaru faces during his journey, but no matter how many times he gets struck, he's always able to pass through. But can the same be said for Light? If at any point it's simply impossible for Light to advance, then his journey will end there. However, one major difference is that of Light's character. It is far more different than Subaru's, and logically, he wouldn't make the same mistakes or have the same interests as Subaru, which would cause him to die pointless deaths. With everything being laid out, let's see how Light would do in the verse of Re:Zero. So one day, after walking home from classes, Light is mysteriously teleported and ends up in the kingdom of Lagunica. He would be extremely confused, as literally nothing happened to him, and he's been sent to a new world. Light, however, has shown his ability to think rationally and act logically during the most stressful situations, even at this age. So Light would try to get an understanding of where he is. He'd aimlessly wander around as Subaru did, even trying to purchase an Appa, but because his currency isn't the right one for the kingdom of Lagunica, he'd be swiftly rejected. Light would start to notice the patterns, but he still wouldn't be able to come to the conclusion that he's in a new world until the first major threat he faces, the Free Alleyway Bandits. Now, Subaru, despite seemingly weak, is actually fairly strong even without Return by Death or any of his other abilities. He has knowledge of Kendo and frequently performed calisthenics while on Earth, which is how, despite looking so frail, he's actually quite strong. Light is also physically fit, but he has no knowledge of martial arts, so in a straight up fight, he'd suffer an embarrassing defeat. Does this mean Light is done for before the story even begins? Well, actually no, Light is someone who likes to avoid conflict, especially physical fights, aside from the one he had with L when he was memory wiped. Light would use his quick thinking and charismatic nature to talk his way out of the situation, saving himself from death. However, things began to change dramatically once Light encounters Emilia. When Subaru first encountered Emilia, he immediately became infatuated with her. The entirety of Arc 3 revolves around Subaru's love for Emilia, which is why he decides to stay in the mansion, despite being targeted and killed constantly by Rem. Light would have no reason to feel anything for Emilia and would go on about his journey. He wouldn't bother to accompany Emilia to the stash house to get the insignia. Light would quickly realize that he's in a new world after seeing Emilia use magic, noticing the currency is different, literal animals are walking around, and much more. He'd probably go through a wave of emotions, but he'd accept the fact that he is where he is now, and he may as well make a name and living for himself. Light is extremely intelligent, and his knowledge is vast for a high school student of his age. He's knowledgeable in things such as academics, theoretical science, computer science, engineering, coding, and much more. Light would use his knowledge to make multiple inventions that would be seen as otherworldly to the citizens of Lagunica. It would actually be a bit similar to an alternate version of Subaru in the Raph route. In this route, Subaru essentially became the richest man in the world. His knowledge of inventions on Earth combined with his ability to abuse Return by Death. At first glance, they simply seemed to be discarded, messed up drafts, but they in fact were the source of the organization's wealth, the many mysterious creations brought about by the Purge King. It might not be very helpful, engines or things like that. I don't get the mechanism at all. As expected, different kinds of foods are the easiest to figure out. Mumbling complaints, looking somewhere other than here was her master. He would speak of knowledge and culture that no one had ever seen, discovered or noticed, be it leads or the ultimate results. By meeting lots of people, that black-haired boy had repeatedly made great decisions, like he had been marked by fate. He had many unique ideas, and a pioneer of culture had been granted cleverness. With those many pieces of knowledge he spoke of, the experts of fields of study that had been in slumber had been lit with a new flame. Those experts would examine and discuss that boy's joking words, which represented possibilities incomprehensible to ordinary people, with seriousness and ultimately establish them into theories. And so with that producing enormous profits, the boy who possessed nothing had been nurtured into a great villain. If Subaru, a man who was less intelligent and knowledgeable than Light, can become the richest man in the world in just under 3 years, imagine what Light could achieve with his knowledge and intellect and the ability of return by death, which he'd be able to use more efficiently than Subaru. However, there's a problem. Since Light doesn't follow Amelia to find the insignia, he doesn't encounter the first major boss of ReZero, Elsa Greinhardt. Because of this, Amelia would be killed, causing Puck to turn into his true form, the Beast of the End. Puck would attempt to freeze over the world, and assuming Light is stuck in the capital, he'd be caught in the frost and die. So does this mean that Light is forced to accompany Amelia? Well, not exactly. It may take Light a few tries, but all he has to do is make some distance between himself and the capital, and the frost that Puck unleashes on the capital and attempts to unleash on the world wouldn't affect him. You also need to remember that in every loop where Amelia died, Reinhardt would arrive and kill Puck. The world would return to normal soon after, and life would continue on for Light. He'd go on to accumulate wealth and gain influence, most likely encountering Otto the Merchant and working together with him. Light would simply build a life worth living that doesn't have to involve trauma and stress that Subaru goes through due to his love for Amelia. But would things change if we had post-time skip Light be transported into the world of ReZero instead of pre-time skip Light? Well, actually, yes. Everything is similar at the start, except as soon as Light encounters Amelia, he'd talk to her for a bit and then gain influence on the world. He'd come to realize that he isn't on Earth and is in a new life, his new life that has started in a new world. Light would immediately begin to scheme and have interest in gaining control over the kingdom, and he quickly recognized that Amelia is the perfect person to manipulate to achieve his goals. However, you need to remember that Puck has the ability to read the surface thoughts and intentions of individuals he comes in contact with, to an extent. It's not borderline mind reading, but rather a level of empathy. Now, although Light wouldn't know this, it's debatable as to whether or not Light could hide his true intentions. Light was able to fool those he came into contact with and act as if he genuinely wanted to catch Kira, while in actuality he was Kira himself. The only one to see through this act was Elle, whose psychological understanding of Light is on a different level. If we go for a safer option and say that Puck would be able to read Light's true intentions, he'd be very hesitant on Light getting close to Amelia. Light, however, would be easily able to manipulate Amelia into trusting him, and Amelia is generally kind-hearted and easy to get the trust of. Puck can hate Light all he wants, but as long as Light doesn't do anything actively bad to Amelia in any way, shape, or form, he's fine to be around in Amelia's eyes. They travel to the hut and they'd encounter Elsa. Light has no chance of beating Elsa one-on-one, so it would be a repeat process of dying and returning unless Light is able to use the first few loops to memorize Elsa's attack pattern and hold on long enough for Reinhardt to show up and defeat Elsa. With this, the first arc would be complete. Light would join Amelia at the mansion, but a problem would arise. Since he smells like the witch due to return by death like Subaru did, Rem and Ram would distrust Light heavily. After figuring out who's been murdering him, Light would have to be on his best behavior as Subaru was until enough time passes to where Rem and Ram realize that Light isn't a threat. Now that Rem and Ram are dealt with, Light can go on to his goal of achieving power for Amelia. He'd realize soon that Roswell also has goals he wants to achieve, and they involve having Amelia ascend to the throne. There would be no need to manipulate Roswell, so Roswell wouldn't need to go about his plan of having Amelia enter the sanctuary. To explain, Roswell's main objective is to kill the divine dragon. Amelia is chosen as the candidate to be the next ruler of Lagunica and the next dragon priestess, which is why he wants her to win the election so he can get closer to the divine dragon. Amelia needs as many votes and support of the people as she can get, so Roswell has Frederica lead Amelia and Subaru to the sanctuary where the people of Arlem are evacuated because of Betelgeuse and the witch cult's attack. Because of this, the villagers of Arlem are now under house arrest because of Garfield, who won't let them go unless someone frees the sanctuary. In order to free the sanctuary, you need to complete the trials, and Amelia is qualified to do so, but Roswell doesn't believe Amelia can do it on her own, and so he gets Subaru to accompany her. Light would make up an entirely different plan and would abuse the effects of Return by Death to gather intel on all the opposing camps, such as the Crush camp, Priscilla camp, and Anastasia camp. He'd use the intel to sabotage the other camps, which would result in a landslide of a victory for Amelia. Light would be free to manipulate Amelia. With Roswell and the entire Amelia camp at his side, he'd use the knowledge of Earth to build the Amelia camp's influence and give them access to vast resources. Light would be able to achieve the world he wanted, one free of crime, through Amelia's power. So to recap, if we use pre-time skip Light, he wouldn't have any feelings or any goal to use Amelia, so he'd avoid her. He'd focus on himself and use his intellect and knowledge to build a comfortable life for himself, becoming a hugely rich and powerful person like the Wrath Root. This means, however, that Amelia would die, but the world would be saved by Reinhardt. Post-time skip Light, aka more of an evil Light, however, would stop at nothing to manipulate Amelia to taking the throne, where he'd gain control over the kingdom for Amelia.